Well, hello there. Apparently, this is how I'm starting my episodes now, at least for the time being. We're having fun. We're playing. We're not taking ourselves too seriously. Here on The Glass Box, a podcast and a platform meant to help guide you to authentic liberation through a variety of means. Today, we are diving into human design and the gene keys with expert and spiritual life coach Luisa Lucia. I originally met her in Mexico in April 2024, which is honestly really interesting because that corresponded with the eclipse portal. So that's fun. Just a little connection I've made. Full transparency, because obviously it's me. Like, I can't help myself. We were originally supposed to record this episode in July of 2024, but things happened. I got knocked off of my pedestal, so to speak, and it was delayed a year. We recorded July 2025, and unfortunately, my schedule and my energy was pulled elsewhere after recording this. So, again, full transparency. Louisa does reference the Human Design Conference that happened in Santa Fe in September. And if you are listening to this, you're probably well aware that it is not September 2025 anymore. As I record this, it's October, but you might be listening to this decades down the road, centuries, perhaps. That would be interesting. Anyway, today's episode, what can I say? Other than it is essentially a free masterclass for you. I highly recommend, after listening to this, you follow the links in the show notes, go find Louisa and take her actual masterclasses because goddamn, like it will blow your mind. Anyway, I'm not going to formally introduce Louisa. Instead, I'm going to let her introduce herself. Cue the transition. Kai says, tell us a bit about you.
Ooh, okay. So, hey, what's up? My name is Luisa. I guess when you say that, the first thing that comes to mind is obviously like my design, like through the lens of my design. I'm a 1-3 self-projected projector. So we're both SPPs. What's up? I have only one channel, the 1333, the prodigal. I'm a cross of consciousness. I mean, this is all, yeah, like just basics of my chart. But beyond that, I mean, yeah, I specialize in human design. I also use the gene keys. I work with them very closely in my practice. So I'm certified as a life coach, but really, like the core of my practice is human design and gene keys, along with a couple of other sort of complementary or supplementary modalities that I like to bring in, along the way that help more with the embodiment aspects because though human design and gene keys are incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful tools, sometimes they can get a little bit heady. Like people can get caught up in the information and like the mental component and forget that it really is all about the body and that everything comes back to the body. And so I like to bring in some like supportive practices that help to get you back into your body, in addition to using these really powerful frameworks. But yeah, I mean, when it comes to me, what else is there really? I grew up in Florida, but I left when I was pretty young. I live in California. I've been in California a long time now. I know you're over there in Florida. So I mean, I hopped from one coast to the other. But it's been a windy journey because I'm a third line. Like, I have a third line body. So yeah, my journey through life and how I've gotten to this place, to this point is it's pretty wild.
We love wild. It makes things
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, oh, totally. Oh, it's been fun. It's been fun. Like, I have stories. I mean, like, I'm a 35-3. That's like my design son is like 35-3. That's the experiential way. And like, really anchored by the third line. It's intense. So I mean, it's been yeah, I've
Mm.
definitely got the stories. It's been wild. It's been fun. It's also been a bit scary at times. you know. You know.
It's like I can resonate with that for sure. I love how you brought up the embodiment piece, like right off the bat. Because a lot of people that I talk to about human design and the gene keys specifically, they're like, I love all of this information, but how do I actually integrate it? And that was something like for people listening in, Luisa and I met on a retreat in Mexico last year. And I remember being there and like I had just recently discovered human design, that I was a self-projected projector and everything. And there you were already a few years into your experiment, right? Like, and I could see that you were embodying being a self-projected projector and just everything else. So how has the gene keys and human design really helped you, or like kind of just share a bit about your journey embodying that and the difference it's made?
Okay. So yeah, it's interesting when I found human design, I was already very much like on a path, and I had done a lot of the more like tactile work, a lot of the embodiment work already. And so I think
Mm,
that helped because prior to that I had been in a place where I went through a really big mental health crisis in my early 30s, right around the time my daughter was born. So I have an 8-year-old daughter. And I had a really bad experience postpartum. It was like just a very intense time in my life. And it was around that time that I started digging deeper into my healing and into my spiritual journey, even though I had already kind of always been on that path. It was like I took it really deep at that point because I was, at a point of desperation. I was in a really dark place. And I started first with a lot of like, I found an amazing embodiment coach who actually really helped me to get into my body because I was at a point where I was very dissociated. I felt very, very depressed and dissociated and disconnected. And yeah, that embodiment coach ultimately went on to become one of my best friends. She was just so incredible and we connected so deeply. And she really was one of the first people who helped me to really get back in touch with like what I was feeling.
mm,
And I was also around that time I was pursuing like a tantric path and like learning how to live more like a tantric way of life, not just like the eroticism, not just like the sexual element, but like just fully like being in your body and like full acceptance of like the human experience, like the
mm,
bigger picture, like um holistic view on all of that. And I was really working with a lot of those modalities because at that time I felt so disconnected. And it was around that same time that I found human design. And I was almost like not sure which direction I was going to take because it
mm,
was like so many things at once were just kind of dropping it into my lap, like coming into my awareness. And I was like being pulled in all these different directions. So I dabbled in like a little bit of everything. um but human design was what really, I don't know, it just really came to the forefront and it was what really like stuck for me. But at the same time, I was fortunate because I had these like supportive practices in place. So I think a big thing with design is, especially when you're first getting into it and when you're first kind of like diving into the quote unquote experiment, is it's all about strategy and authority.
mm,
Like you can have all the information and you can get into all the details and all the nuance, and there's so much there. There's so much there. But it really, in terms of actually experimenting like in your life and your journey, it always comes back to strategy and authority. The thing is, like, it sounds really simple at face value, but like it's not. It's not at all. And I think one of the biggest reasons, there are a number of reasons why it is actually in practice a lot more challenging than it is in theory. But I think one of them is because like authority always comes from the body. except in rare cases, like, when you have quote unquote no inner authority, like as a mental projector or reflector, your process is a little bit different. But for most of us, the majority, of people walking the planet, authority comes from the body. And if you're disconnected from your body, how do you know what your authority is telling you? That can be really, really challenging. And so where, Raw would always harp on about strategy and authority, like, always returning to that mantra essentially, that's not always so easy if you're disconnected from your center of authority. If you're not listening to your body, you don't actually know what it's telling you. And so that's why I think, as much as like strategy and authority is the ultimate tool in human design, like you have to have practices that help you like quiet the mind and help bring
Mhm.
you back into your body, and to really feel what it's feeling and to really listen to what it's saying.
Mhm. I love that. And something that I caught on with that too is like that I've noticed and I've done myself. Like I will own up to that is I identified with human design and the gene keys and I'm like, wow, I resonate with this so much. I want to learn everything. Well, guess what? That puts me up into the headspace, right? What's it doing? It's disconnecting me from my body. So, and because I get fascinated with the details, one of my struggles with this experiment, right, has been trying to get into all the details while not realizing that I have been disconnecting from my body and my authority. So it's like, it's very much the body comes first. Like you need to come back to the body before you can get into the design aspect of things.
Definitely. I think it's natural that there's gonna be, like, a bit of toggling. What I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed in my process is I'll go through periods, and of course, I'm a first light mind, so for me, it's, like, natural to wanna consume a lot of information, but I'll go through those periods where, like, I'm in consumption mode and I'm taking everything, in, like, and I am, at times more heady and, like,
Mm-hmm.
up here just absorbing everything, but then I can only do that for so long before I drop into these periods of deep integration where, like, after I've done that, I have to rest and I have to
Mm-hmm.
let it really like absorb at a more physical level. And so then there'll be periods where like I can no longer consume, like I can't take in any more information. I have to stop, I have to slow down, I have to rest. And then that's when I'm like reminded, okay, now it's time to ground and now it's time to drop back into your body and just forget all the information and forget trying to make sense of things and like come back to yourself and maybe like go outside and like touch some grass and do some movement and do some stretching or like whatever the case may be, whatever those tools are that you access when you need to integrate. And so that's what I feel like this journey has been a lot of for me is like, yes, taking in the information, and especially, as projectors as well, like projectors are designed to study. That's why there's a discount for for
Mm-hmm.
projectors. There's an endowment like through Jovian Archive. And it's because we're designed more than any other type to actually like study and have this knowledge, to
Mm-hmm.
understand it. So I mean, that's real for us. That's not like it's not wrong that you're curious, that you're fascinated, that you want to dig in and get as much information as you can. But ultimately it's not about the information, it's more about letting it land in the body and like how that integrates into your way of life. Now, one thing I
Mm-hmm.
do love that I will say about the gene keys, and this is true for human design to some extent as well, like similar but different. But with the gene keys, especially like, with the book, what's cool about that is it's a transmission. So Richard Rudd's whole thing is like by simply reading and contemplating this information, it literally speaks to your body at a cellular level. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like absorbing the information is a lot isn't enough in and of itself to help like affect change at the level of the body. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's just being mindful. I think with contemplation, the whole thing is like the point is not to think too hard. Right? It's to like take it in and just like let it absorb without necessarily having to think too hard about it. Like it's not about making sense of it.
Right. It's feeling into it. One of my favorite
Yeah.
things to do with the gene keys is, it was a fascinating connection for me when I realized this, because my environment is artificial shores and then low sound. And I made the connection a few months ago, but then it came back to me, 6124 channel, where I love laying outside next to water with like some kind of my house or like a neighborhood or something on the other side and just lay there and let whatever thoughts about the gene keys or human design or the world, whatever, just come to me and like go through. It's fascinating. And I've noticed that when I allow myself the space to do that, it integrates so much more quickly than if I were trying to force everything through, which is what I was doing like a year and a half ago.
Totally. That makes a lot of sense, like just in terms of your design for so many reasons, also because you're quad right. And like
Mm-hmm.
when you're quad right, you just you can't force things. It's not about that. There has to be that openness, there has to be that spaciousness. And yeah, I mean, and definitely with the low sound, I mean, I'm sure you understand this like pretty well. But the way that you take in information with like a low sound determination, it's like everything has to be just kind of calm and easy, you know.
Right. Mm-hmm. When I was looking at, sorry, we're like jumping tracks a bit.
No,
I
go,
was looking
go.
at your chart earlier today, and I didn't realize it, a completely open solar plexus or
Yeah,
solar
totally
center.
undefined. Yeah, no, absolutely undefined solar plexus. That's right. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like what's that reaction?
No, it is. It is. It's an interesting one. It's funny. It's like I have two totally undefined centers, my solar plexus and my ego center, my heart
Oh,
center.
yes.
And the undefined solar plexus, I do really well with it. It's interesting. It's one of those where like I I don't know, like I'm not so bothered by it. It's like I'm for some reason I I feel like I'm really good at like like being aware of other people's stuff, but like not taking it on.
Mhm.
And like I feel like I have a pretty healthy solar plexus considering it's totally undefined. And yet with my undefined ego, I struggle tremendously. And so it's
Mm,
really interesting to notice that I have these two centers that are both like completely undefined and like one of them gives me a lot more trouble than the other. And so with the solar plexus, I mean, it's kind of fun actually. Uh, it is. It's actually fun because I can and it depends also to some extent like how attuned I am to the other person and also like what their definition is, but I can literally feel into other people and like what they're feeling through that center and like at
mm,
times be very aware of it. And like I said, it depends on the person, how attuned I am to them and like, how they're defined and stuff, but I'll pick things up and very much in awareness of it, and I'm also really good at emptying from all of that stuff because I prioritize a lot of pure aura time. That's a big thing for me, like
mm,
where I just spend time in only my own aura. That's huge for me and I do a lot of that. And so between that and just like general like I guess like energetic hygiene, just a lot of like
mm,
cleansing. I spend a lot of time in water. I do a lot of saging and all of those things. And I feel like with the solar plexus, yeah, it's one of those. I mean, I've seven undefined centers in total, but only two
mhm,
that have absolutely no activation. So I mean, having so much openness in my chart, I do tend to be very aware of what I'm like picking up and what I'm taking on. And I just notice generally that in some centers I struggle a lot more than others.
mm,
The solar plexus is one that interestingly doesn't get to me, which is nice, actually, it's nice, but some of them definitely kick my ass.
Mm. There's always a reason for the way that I jump around here.
Yeah, no, I trust your
Right.
process totally. All good.
So the solar, like I'm still new enough to like a lot of the details where I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert at all. But you are like, one, you have a background in physics, which is like, what?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but then like the solar is very heavily tied to what's happening with 2027, right?
Yes, so much so. Yes, totally,
Yeah.
totally. That's right. I mean, in a lot
Like,
in a variety of ways actually, because
mhm,
obviously we have the impending solar plexus mutation, which I touched upon a bit when I gave my master class earlier this year. But yeah, so we have a lot of mutation that's going to be happening very soon, related to the histidine codon, which has a direct correlation genetically with the 49th and 55th gates, which you have both actually activated in your design. So that's going to be interesting for you. Though the mutation, yeah, though the mutation is not like, it's not retroactive, meaning that
mhm,
it's gonna take hold for people born like 2027 and beyond, like in terms of
mhm.
actually having that mutated solar plexus. It's not going to be like a retroactive mutation. Evolution doesn't really work that way. But that doesn't mean that we're not all going to feel it. We're still all going to feel it. So yeah, those gates are mutating, and it's gonna dampen the motor effect of the solar plexus, because the bonds in those channels are going to be breaking down. So the 1949 and then the 3955 are both, the bonds in those channels from the root to the solar plexus are breaking down. And so essentially what that looks like, it's like it's a whole big thing, but basically the root won't be applying as much pressure to the solar plexus because of course the root is pressure center, which you have a really interesting root because it's undefined, but you have so much activation there. I was looking at your chart and I was like, holy shit, it's like undefined, but it's so activated. And so it's like,
Yep.
even though you're a non-energy projector, you probably really feel that need to like move. I was like, damn, that's
Yeah.
crazy. But that's an interesting one. That's a whole other, like, put that aside for a second. But anyway, the root, which is a pressure center, it applies pressure to the solar plexus via those channels, and two of those gates in the solar plexus, because they're mutating, those bonds are breaking, and so it's going to dampen some of that motor function, because what's ultimately happening right now, the solar plexus is both a motor center, our most powerful motor center actually, and an awareness center. It serves as both. So we have three awareness centers, in the body graph, and the solar plexus is one of them. And actually, the solar plexus is the only one that's both a motor and an awareness center. Okay. And so the motor center function over time is slowly dampening, and it's going to ultimately mutate to become purely awareness. And this is also deeply tied to what we call like a return to rightness in the coming age of
Mhm,
consciousness, because in the past, like our seven centered ancestors, that was a very like strategic way of moving through the world, which is very much tied to, leftness in variable, and rightness is very much tied to the solar plexus binary and solar plexus awareness, and this way of like processing the world that's more like emotional and intuitive and nuanced and less strategic, which the strategic awareness is rooted in survival. So
mhm.
it's all interconnected.
It's fascinating. I'm just like, one, I could listen to you talk about this all day. And side note, um, anybody listening in, if you did not catch Luis's master classes, like 1010, I was in, did you only have the two? Was I in both of them?
Yeah, I did too. I did like an overview, and then I did a more detailed follow up, and I think you were there for both of them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally recommend. Like so much information. I'm gonna have to go back and watch the replay at some point because it's just like I'm still letting it integrate. You're just like a well of information. I love it. So yeah,
I love that
send
too.
people
And
your
that's
way for that.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna be talking at HDHD in Santa Fe this September. And that's also gonna be like a whole 2027 thing. And it's
Mhm.
not just there's gonna be a couple of people, actually a couple of experts in human design that are all getting together and giving talks on 2027 on the same day. And it's gonna be really cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. There's so many questions I have. Always. Let's talk a bit more about 2027 and like diving a bit deeper into that. Like, I know that's probably going to be very overwhelming for some people, but like I said, you're a well of like just pure wisdom. And people need to hear this stuff. I think especially because I can see how, well, I see the connections between obviously this happening in 2027 and politics, right? Like,
Sure.
I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch kind of play out. Um, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, in a very broad sense,
Mm,
2027 is a huge topic, with, a lot of different, I mean, you can take it in a lot of different directions. There are a lot of different aspects to what's actually going on. And I think when it comes to politics, so I will say I'm definitely not as well versed in politics as you are. I know that's like kind of one of your things, and it makes sense for you for sure. It's probably not as much for me, though.
mhm,
Obviously, like I have an awareness of like, what's going on out there. And what I would say in a more general sense is like, the reason it's very normal and natural. Let's put it this way. It's very normal and natural that things are like so unstable and so unpredictable right now. We're at like a really potent turning point. Like
mhm,
it's a pivotal time in our planet's history, period. Like it's just what the shift that we're on the precipice of this shift that's absolutely massive in terms of, so what we call in human design like global cycles, right? We move into these different phases in our evolution that are influenced by the neutrino data in the background field, and we shift through these cycles, and it's all connected to the precession of the equinox. It gets really technical with like the geometry and all the numbers, so I won't necessarily throw all of that at you. But essentially, like as our solar system moves through space, the neutrino field in the background shifts, and we're influenced by this neutrino data that we receive from all the star systems in the sky. And it happens in a very particular pattern. There's a geometry to it that's cyclical and pattern oriented. And so every 400 years we move into a new cycle, which is influenced by essentially like a different consciousness, like a background field, like a background frequency that brings like a new consciousness to the planet through this neutrino field. And so every 400 years this changes, and 411 actually, if you want to get really specific, but we typically just average it to 400. So in 2027 is when the shift is taking place. We call it the changing of the keys. There's a reason for that. That's actually one of like when I did the more specialty masterclass, you sat in on that. So you know a little bit more about what's actually happening and how and why and all the things. But essentially the shift is taking place in 2027. And what's interesting is concurrent with that, the solar plexus is mutating. So it's actually two different things that are happening, but they're happening
oh,
simultaneously. Right, exactly. So one is actually the changing of the keys, the shifting of that lock and key mechanism, right? Where all of a sudden we're going to have different keys answering to the locks. And that's what happens every 411 years based on the precession of the equinox. And then it's concurrent with that. When that happens, that's what's also catalyzing the mutation in the solar plexus system. And so these are two different things. They're happening at the same time. And so that's very consequential because that's also not always the case. So, like under the last cycle, which is the one we're coming to the end of now, the cross of planning, right? The keys changed in 1615, and then we underwent a mutation from 7 to 9 centers, but that wasn't actually until later on in the cycle in 1781. And so there was like a gap between the point where the keys changed and we underwent this mutation, which was a significant one, because to
Mm.
jump from 7 to 9 centers is a significant mutation. They happened in the same era essentially, but not at the same time.
Mm.
And so this is going to be a really potent shift because we have two things happening simultaneously. And they're very much connected, but also different. And what's interesting about that is as we move into this coming age under the Phoenix, we have on the one hand the 3420, right, which anchors the cross of the sleeping Phoenix because it's a binary, but it also forms a definition.
Mhm.
But then on the other hand, we have the 55 and the 59. So the 55 is one of the keys in the coming age. And what's really interesting about that is it's also one of the gates that's mutating. And so it's essentially saying, okay, well, the 55 is going to be an answer to one of these locks, but we actually don't really know what that answer is going to look like because, yeah, because meanwhile it's undergoing mutation. And so it's going to be really, I mean, like, the point is, so from a very technical level, like this is what's happening from the human design perspective, from the human design lens. There's a lot that's like changing in our human evolutionary process. But for people who don't have all of that background and all of that knowledge, they're looking out at the world and they're like, holy shit, like everything is blowing up. Like,
Yep.
what's happening? Like all of our old systems and structures, they're crumbling, and that's totally normal. Like at this point in time, we're at the end of the cross of planning, and that's what the planning brought us. That was the whole point of that cross was the implementation of these systems and structures to support the human population essentially. The planning is a tribal cross, and tribal circuitry is for support. Like that's the primary keynote for tribal circuitry is support. So under the cross of planning, which was anchored by the 3740 on the tribal circuit, we were meant to bring support to the tribe, to our communities, to our growing population, etc. And all of that is now disintegrating,
Mhm.
and as scary as it is, it's meant to be. It's meant to be, you know?
Yeah. I did not realize those were two separate things. That's fascinating.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
I'm fully going to be going down that rabbit hole after this. Um, I remember you made a post on Instagram. I think it was earlier this year about the 3740 and what was happening in LA at the time with the wildfires.
Sure.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, it's fascinating to see how looking back on so much of what's happening, like I can fully recognize how chaotic everything is, right? Like we are being smacked left and right by like one thing after another. And it's overwhelming, but it's like this information, just you providing that and saying this is literally, it's written, like this is meant to happen.
Yep.
It offers some kind of calm, like, okay, I can just kind of surrender into it, like stop fighting
Totally.
it.
Totally, 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 totally. Yes, that's so real. I think the way that I often say it is like nothing can stop the wheel from turning. Nothing can
Mm.
stop the wheel from turning. And this is literally the changing of the keys is literally the turning of the wheel. Like that's what it is. It's kind of like, the wheel of time or whatever you want to call it. Like, our human experience is not it's not a stagnant experience. It's not a stagnant process. It's like it's riddled with change, and it always has been, and it always will be, and this is like it feels extra crunchy right now because we're at that pivot point. We're always moving through these cycles on a continuous basis in the here and now. Like even under the cross of planning, over time, we moved from the sixth line frequency to the first line frequency of that cross. And so we were always moving through these like more incremental shifts, but now we're at the pivot point where like we're coming upon again the precipice of a much bigger shift. And like, yeah, shit is hitting the fan. And, there are a lot of reasons why. And it's interesting because if you actually go back to like some of Ra's lectures from literally 20 years ago or more, so much of what is happening now, he predicted like
Mm.
to the T, like so specifically. And the thing that he always, went on about was like he wasn't like, oh, I'm not like a psychic with some kind of like, visionary like, capabilities. It was very much like this is a mechanical prophecy. Like it's mechanical, it's mechanistic. And what that means is he could look at the wheel and read the code. It's literally just a code. It's like a language model. And you look at it and you understand what it's telling you. And like it's very mathematical. Like it's very mathematical, it's very geometric. It's literally just like a source code. And you're like, oh, okay, this is what is coming next down the line by watching the patterns. And so that's why he was able to see these things, not because he was some like visionary, though he was brilliant, but it was more just like I know how to read the source code and I know what it's telling me. And so he was able to predict like a lot of what's happening now. And it is scary because it's like, there's a lot of uncertainty and we don't really totally know what the next age is going to look like. And even when you have access to this knowledge, even when you're in awareness of it, it can still feel unsettling at times. And this is coming like me personally, like there are moments of freak out. Even though I
Mm.
understand what's happening, I still have moments of freak out. But it does make it like easier to know like okay, this was inevitable. This
Mhm.
was inevitable, and we can go back and we can track these cycles through our past and see how they marked like certain phases in our human evolution. And so like to be able to go back and clearly see like yes, this has happened many times before and it will like continue to happen into the future. It's not something that we have control over. It's much bigger than us. And so there is a certain acceptance in that. And yet, like, our human experience can still feel really overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like 100%.
Yeah.
Oh, you said a few things there that are kind of like floating around in my mind. One, the freak out, and that just reminds me like in those moments what do you do, right? To like stop the freak out, return back to the body, right?
Totally. Totally. More absolutely more than what
Mhm.
I've like come, and this has come really front and center into my awareness the closer we get to 2027. It is, and it's one of the things I honestly struggle with a lot personally. It's so much about nervous system regulation, like
Mhm.
more than literally anything. And I think that's the piece for me that's the hardest also because I grew up in an environment with a lot of trauma. And so I've pretty much had a dysregulated nervous system my entire life. And
Mhm.
I think that's why I turned so deep into like the embodiment work at a time when I really needed it. And yet it's still, for me, it's hard. It's like a continuous practice and like a continuous like remembrance to come back to that place where I'm like, like I said, like touching the grass and like working with my breath and just like, showing my body like, love and gentleness and all of those things. Because like you can have all this awareness that like okay, this is what's happening and why, but if you don't feel safe in your body, you're gonna freak the fuck out. Like
Mhm.
that's just like your body has to be able to hold all of that and has to be able to like, stay calm through that
Mhm.
process. Like your mind can understand it, and if your body just isn't there, you're gonna be freaking out. And I think that for me, that's definitely like the biggest source of like my freakouts is like when I yeah, when I don't feel safe, which is not so much a mental thing, it's like a physical thing. So I think the nervous system regulation for everyone is going to be the most important piece as, as this gets crunchier and crunchier because it inevitably will. And the more that you can like stay calm and just like trust your process, the better off you're going to be.
Mhm. That's again where like bringing it back to basics, strategy and authority. Like,
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, and this is another thing that Ross said often was like, the whole thing about strategy and authority is like if you're really following it, like if you're
mhm,
really, really practicing it, and I'm not saying like no one necessarily practices it to the T. It's like not, it's not a perfect science by any means because we're, you know, we're human and we fuck up and that's how life is. But if you're really practicing it, the whole point is that it ensures that you're in the right place at the right time. That's the whole point of strategy and authority. You know, it keeps you locked to your fractal line and it ensures that you wind up in the right place at the right time, and that is really the key to survival.
mhm,
Like through this transition, that's the biggest thing that's going to keep you safe and keep you surviving, is like being in the right place at the right time, right? Where we're all meant to be. And again, it's one of those things that's like a lot, you know, easier to talk about in theory than it is to put into practice. But like, you know, working with your strategy and authority is going to be all the more important in the coming age, because a lot of that tribal support, it's now, you know, dropping out of the background frequency, and hence when it's dropping out of the background frequency, it's dropping out of our reality. And so we're not necessarily going to have the support of the tribe in the same way. You know, Phoenix is integration circuitry, the 3420 is integration, and it's all about the power of the now, and it's very individual. It's very, you know, it's not at all what we had before. It's very different. Like the shift from planning to Phoenix, it's like a very stark contrast. It's a very stark contrast, and it's going to be really important in the coming age, that you're putting yourself first, but in a healthy way, in a
mhm.
holistic way, not in a selfish way per se, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It goes back to the like you can't pour from an empty cup. Like cliche to say, but it's true. Like you need to be taking care of yourself first and foremost because what happens if you're not? You are putting your trauma onto other people, which just creates more trauma and it's a snowball effect.
Totally, totally. That is a big piece, and it's interesting. I because I'm writing a book right now, and I also wrote about this in the book, in the chapter on, you know, on mutation and 2027 and all the things. But I did sort of a deep dive into the tribal stream, like
Mhm.
that, the 1949 and the 3740. So the 3740 is like the anchor of the cross of planning. But it's connected to the 1949. It's all part of the same stream, and that whole stream is about bargains, and it's about
Mm.
how much of myself do I sacrifice for the good of the tribe. And so what's really interesting about that tribal stream, the 1949 3740, is like oftentimes you can like overgive, like you wind up sacrificing too much of yourself, and essentially what you just said, like there's a lot of like you know, pouring from an empty cup and getting, you know, really like depleted, exhausted, bitter, whatever you know, whatever the case may be. You know, you can really overgive on those bargains. And so like a lot of that, I think as we come to the end of this cross, you know, we're seeing that more and more. It's interesting. I actually like, I unpacked this a bit in the chapter, and it's not totally fleshed out yet. It's almost done. We're not entirely there, but like the 1949 channel of synthesis, which is, like I said, it's part of that same tribal stream. And of course, the 49 is one of the gates that's mutating. So this is all very like front and center in the coming age. That's one of the bonds that's breaking. It's known colloquially as the channel of the marriage bond, and it's all about like sacrificing yourself in a sense for like the good of the family in many
Mm.
in many ways. It's, again, it's tribal, and it's like what's interesting about that, really, in theory, in an ideal, it's about having these like healthy balanced relationships where there's like good reciprocity, where it's like, okay, I've given something of myself, but I'm getting something in return and I feel nourished and whatever. Like in an ideal sense, that's what it looks like, where it's like, okay, like I love you, you love me. There's, you know, there's caring and there's reciprocity. I'm taking care of my needs, I'm taking care of yours. But in a shadow sense, it's often like overgiving and victimhood and
Mm.
codependency and all of these things. And so, and we've seen like, so it's interesting because we see that, you know, one of the things that's that's very present in the current reality is like more and more people are younger people are no longer interested in getting married or having children. This is a big theme right now. And I think it's especially, it's especially women that are like, you know what, I'm done with this bargain. Like, they're realizing how that really hasn't worked out for them, and they're very, very done because they've been forced to overgive and
Mm.
over sacrifice. I think in many, many cases, obviously not in all cases, but oftentimes, that's the case. And that's very much like the shadow or like the not self frequency of the 1949, which
Mm.
is now disintegrating, like it's breaking down, and that's why we see less people wanting to get married or have children. That's a big part of it.
Right. What I find fascinating with that is like, admittedly, for partially selfish reasons, like 49 is, I have it twice in my chart. It's my unconscious Mars, so my core wound location, and then also my conscious moon. But 49 is heavily tied to the mother wound, right?
Interesting.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear your take on that and I mean, there are many, many interpretations, so I'd be
Right.
curious to actually hear you speak a little bit more on the mother wound and the 49.
So, crap, I opened up a can of worms, didn't I? I mean, it's like maybe not heavily tied, but like I can see the connections. And I know Richard Rudd talks about it a bit in the Gene Keys book. Um, and I've talked about it with a couple of other people who share that wound as well, like the 49 core wound, which has been fascinating, but like particularly because there's ties to the mother wound there. And then with the 1949, traditionally, you mentioned being like the marriage bond. It's just, there's a connection there for me that I'm still kind of like parsing out about that going through a mutation with the connections and the correlations between especially young women realizing, I don't know if I ever want to get married. I don't know if I ever want to have children. They're waking up to their own mother wounds with their mothers, right? And then like I've been waking up to my wounding with my mom, and then I also see her wounding with her mom. And it's
Sure.
like the way that I'm noticing this, like starting with me and then rippling out, is just fascinating. Like, because it's literally, you can see it on a collective level, how we're slowly beginning to awaken to this. Like what that is yet, I still don't know. But it's just like, it's fascinating, particularly because then tap into 49 with the gene keys, the gift of which being revolution. So it's like,
Yep.
this is a revolution of motherhood. And like,
Mm.
just there's so much. And the way that it ties into what's going on politically is just like fascinating to watch.
Yeah. Wow, there's like a lot I could speak to in there, but I think just on that last point, it's really interesting because if you read the 49th key, I think it does speak very much to like what's going on right now politically.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a big piece for sure because it's all about like when there's a massive revolution there has to be like a purge, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a purging of like the old timeline, the old storylines, all of like the ickiness that like comes out in that process. And so like I think we can look out at what's happening in the world today and like say that there's definitely this shadow frequency that's still fighting for control.
Mm-hmm.
That's like it's like the dying cry of like the shadow frequency trying to like stop this change, this
Mm-hmm.
transition that we know is like inevitably coming, because of course there are many people, essentially like the white male in particular, not to like, that have benefited from this old paradigm, from the patriarchy. And they might not be, and this is obviously not to like, I'm not saying that all white men are in this
Right.
boat. I'm not saying that at all because I know there are plenty of men who are very conscious and doing the work and all the things, but I mean the reality is there are people who don't want things to change. There are
Yeah.
people who have benefited from, the current paradigm that is now crumbling. And so I see very much a lot of what's happening in the world today as people who don't maybe want change are grasping, to the old and trying to like stop this
Mm.
transition. But again, nothing can stop it. That's just making like the death more painful, you know?
Yeah.
It's like it's trying to like fight like the inevitable. And so it's and he Richard Rudd does talk about this in the 49th key about how all of those shadow frequencies have to like come to the surface to be purged. And so for a while it might feel like worse before it gets better, because that,
Mm.
that is the nature of revolution. It's like revolution doesn't happen easily, it doesn't. And like, I think when it comes to the mother wound, as you were speaking, what was really like, I guess, like popping out for me with the 1949, it's like it's one of the most sensitive channels in the body graph, the channel of synthesis. It's really it's like empath energy. It's like being attuned to the other, being sensitive to the other, being attuned to them, understanding like what they need and figuring out how to balance again what they need with what you need. And even though it is known colloquially as the channel of the marriage bond, it is also very much just an energy that's geared towards bonding, period. And
Mm.
so it could very much be like tied to your relationship with your mother. And like, were you nurtured in that relationship? Did she, as a mother, provide you with the appropriate nurturing or not? And we know for women of our age, who basically have moms in the boomer generation, that a lot of those women didn't really nurture in the ways that they could and probably should have, because perhaps they just didn't have, they did not have the luxury to do so.
Mhm.
It's an interesting generation to look at the women of that generation and try to like, unpack some of like what they went through. But I know for me, my I definitely struggled in my relationship with my mom. I struggle to this day, in my relationship with my mom. And the 1949 is very much like, did you get what you needed? Did you
Mm.
receive, the nurturing and the support, that you really needed to thrive? And so I see in that sense how you could very much like connect the 49 to the mother wound, because like you're not, you know, totally, you're not necessarily going to have like a healthy, balanced marriage if you didn't have like a healthy, nurturing childhood,
Mhm.
and not to say that in all cases, but like, that's where you first learn, the sense of like giving and receiving and like how to love people and how to love yourself and all of that. So
Right. Yeah. It's like learning to remother yourself, right?
totally, 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 totally. And I think that for a long time, like we weren't doing that, and we were just like, seeking outward and like jumping into relationships rather than like shifting the focus back to like ourselves and like what we needed. And now more and more people are like waking up to that and
Mhm.
realizing like it actually starts with me.
Yeah. Hmm. Such good information. Hmm. Let's go back to the wheel for a bit.
Yes, sure.
Like one, of course, like whenever you talk about the wheel and like you can't stop the wheel from turning, part of me is like, well, let's just fucking break the wheel. Um, but I know we can't do that. But like,
Yeah.
so we're going from the cross of planning to the sleeping phoenix, correct?
Yep. Yep.
Tell us a bit more about that.
Okay. So Mm, okay, let's see. So in what sense do you want more of like a technical interpretation or more of a practical interpretation, because they're very different. Like when you talk about the
Mm.
wheel, my mind immediately goes technical, because like I can get really deep into like the geometry and the mechanics and all of that. But I feel like that's most people are not not as interested in that. That's where my brain goes. But of course, there's also the more like practical
Mhm.
application of like what that what that means and what that looks like. So which direction do you feel like you want to play in?
Let's start with the practicalities, and then I've got some questions kind of like floating around. If they're appropriate to bring in, I'll bring them in later.
Sure. Okay. Yes. Let's totally let's do the practical. So we're coming to the end of planning. Like I said, these cycles are 411 years. And this changing of the keys is actually occurring in February of 2027. Um, like I said, planning was anchored by the 3740 channel of community, which is part of the tribal circuit. Tribal circuitry is for support. So like everything we built under the cross of planning was essentially like to support the needs of the tribe. And like what's really interesting about that, and this is like mind blowing, by the way, like absolutely mind blowing. But if you look at so prior to planning, we were under the cross of consciousness, which also happens to be like my personal cross. So I'm a
Mm.
cross of consciousness, and prior to planning, the cross of consciousness actually sat in the background frequency, and it was in 1615 that we shifted from consciousness to planning. Now, what's really, really absolutely mind blowing, statistically mind blowing about that is that when we shifted into planning in the background frequency in 1615, the global population, the world population was at about 500 million people. Okay, 500 million people in 1615. In 400 years, our population has boomed from 500 million to 8 billion
Jesus
in
Christ.
400 years under the cross of planning.
So basically, we're a parasite, is what we are. That's where my mind goes.
Well, yeah. I mean, the global population, in my opinion, is definitely too high. And and that's like, again, this is like an inevitable consequence of the cross of planning getting wiped out of the background frequency, that the population now is inevitably like on the decline. So like
Mm.
our population growth in terms of the rate of acceleration, like the acceleration is already in decline. But the growth will continue for a while longer before the effects of that like acceleration decline catches up. That being said, we've reached peak acceleration already. And from here
Mhm.
on out, we will only be on the decline. And the reality is that without the cross of planning in the background, we would never be able to support such a large population anyway. And so the point that I'm making in essence is that it was only because of, literally because of the cross of planning in the background frequency in the 3740 that we were able to support such a massive boom in our global population.
Hmm.
Under a different cross, we would not necessarily have been able to do that. It was all the infrastructure that the cross of planning brought us that even allowed for this level of support. Do you see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so that's really, really significant in the sense that, like, without that support, what do you think is going to happen? you know, it's like it's so. I mean, it puts in a way into perspective, like what the cross of planning brought us. And, there's not, and I also want to emphasize there's like not a good or a bad to this. We could look at that and say, well, we don't really actually want that many people on our planet because, going back to like your original statement and response, like we're a parasite. Oh my gosh, like it's too many people and it's hard to support that many people. And it's going to be impossible actually to support that many people when the cross of planning drops out of the background. And so the reality is like it's this is all how I see this is like in human design we have our individual experiments, right? I'm
Mhm.
in my experiment, you're in your experiment. And there is a much larger experiment going on. There is a much larger global experiment happening on this planet, and this is all these cycles are all part of that bigger experiment. So it's like, let's throw this cross into the background frequency and see what happens. See how that affects evolution on our planet under that cycle in that age of consciousness, right? And so one of the effects, one of the consequences of planning was this like massive boom in the global population that was largely a result of all of this infrastructure, all of this tribal support that we brought in, right? And and so now all of that we know is crumbling. And I think that that's, you know, it's interesting. It can feel certainly a little bit scary and again inevitable. And what I think helps a lot when you contemplate the coming age and the phoenix, what's kind of cool actually, because the 3420, which anchors the phoenix and forms a definition. This is the channel of charisma. This is the only pure manifesting generated channel because it connects the sacral directly to the throat center. So this is like pure sacral to throat, like manifesting potential, but it's not pure manifesting potential because it's sacral center, right? So it is the only like official manifesting generated channel, the 3420 channel of charisma. This is integration circuitry. It's on the individual circuit, but it's like a unique branch of the individual circuit known as integration circuitry, which is wired for survival. And this is actually one of our oldest circuit groups. This is like 3420 is old. If you look at
Mm.
like our evolutionary history from like 5 to 7 to 9 centers, 3420 has been around a long time. And so it's very much like geared towards survival. And it's very much geared towards survival of the individual. So this is not keeping the tribe alive and thriving. It's not so much about how do we support. It's not at all really about how do we support a global population. It's very much about how do I look after myself and
Mm.
ensure my survival. But what's interesting about that, and this is something else that like I've played around with it, but it's so funny because I am writing this book right now on human design. I think it's set to be published early next year based on like the current trajectory. And I'm also very, I'm not quad right, but I'm 3/4 right. So I have a lot of rightness. When I set out to write the book, I was really like, oh, here's a basic outline, but I don't exactly know how it's going to flow. And I don't know how it's going to flow until I get in there. And it turned out that the chapter on evolution is probably the biggest chapter in the book. And that was not intentional at all by any means. It was not at all intentional. I sat down to write it and it just kept coming and coming and coming and coming. There was so much, that I wound up unpacking because it was almost like the awareness was dawning as I was writing it. And like one of the things that I play around with a bit in that chapter is like because 3420 is old. It was, as far back as like our five-centered Neanderthal ancestors had access to the 3420. But what that looks like in a five-centered being versus a nine-centered being is actually very, very, very different because a nine-centered being is a much more evolved form of human. So what survival looks like for a nine-centered being is very different to what survival looked like for a five-centered being or even for a seven-centered being, right? And so in this coming age, we have this integration circuitry anchoring the background frequency, but we also have a nine-centered being with a return to rightness and this potential for self-reflected consciousness. And so it's like really interesting to contemplate like yes, the coming age is going to be wired for like survival and very much like survival of the self, like not worried so much about everyone else, like every man for himself, but not really, because we have access to a heightened state of consciousness that we didn't have when survival was purely like food and shelter and like not getting killed, if that makes sense.
Hmm. That's a fascinating way to look at it. I love that. And it just makes me think too, like, I remember in your second masterclass. So it was the one where you went into, I love how I'm pitching people like, go take her masterclass. Like legit. You mentioned that like there's the turning of the keys and there's the external turning and then the internal, right?
Right.
And I
Yep,
remember
absolutely.
like picking up on that because the internal shift is shifting into my cross of incarnation. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. I'd
Yeah.
love for you
So,
to kind of dive into that a little bit.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so we talk so much about the external theme. Like we pretty much, like, generally speaking, we put all of our emphasis on the external theme, which is planning, shifting into the phoenix, and these are the keys that answer the vessel of love. So the vessel of love is are those four gates. Those are the locks that in this larger cycle define our external theme. So the four gates of the vessel of love are like questions. These locks pose questions that are then answered by the keys. And every 411 years, the keys change. So we have the last 411-year cycle under planning come 2027. It's going to be the four gates of the sleeping phoenix that answer to the vessel of love. Again, that's the external theme. We don't place as much emphasis on the internal theme, though that is also happening at the same time. So this entire locking mechanism is based on the eight gates of the G center, because the G center anchors the totality. And so that gets, again, like a little bit more into like the mechanics, gets a little bit complicated, but basically like these eight gates are the anchor for like the entirety of our existence. And the other four gates are, of course, cross of the Sphinx, the four gates of the Sphinx. So where the vessel, those are the locks for the external theme. The Sphinx, the four gates of the Sphinx, those are the locks for the internal theme. And under this last cycle, which we're now coming to an end, the four keys that answered the Sphinx were the cross of Maya. And now in the coming age, it's going to be the cross of penetration, which, like you said, is your personal cross. And that's going to be, so those four gates in penetration are going to be the keys that answer the internal theme. And I think just generally, like the external theme is what we see all around us. And that's
Mm.
why we pay more attention to it, because it's like a broader collective theme and it's what we notice. It's more apparent and it's more palpable. Whereas the internal theme, I think, is more personal to each and every one of us. And so I think it's not necessarily as obvious, but that doesn't mean that it isn't there and it isn't happening. And I think a lot depends as well on like your personal activations and like whether you in and of yourself hold locks or hold keys and how you experience that. So I think one way, I think, just like as an example, that the internal theme is really apparent for me personally. So these are ways you can kind of get some like context and maybe play around with it is um my only channel is the 1333, right? So obviously I have the 13 activated in my design and I'm very attuned to my 13. I'm very aware of it. I think probably because it is one half of like my only channel. And so I'm very aware of that energy. And that's one of the locks in the Sphinx, obviously. And so what's interesting is in the last 400-year cycle, under planning, where the Maya answered to the Sphinx, it's actually the 61 that was the key for the 13. So my 13 was answered by the 61 for these last like 400 years.
Mm.
And the 61 in the head center is, of course, the gate of mystery or inner truth. And it's like deeply tied to like occult knowledge, in these like esoteric arts. And I feel that like my 13 is kind of like always like listening through that lens. And
Mm.
I really wonder if a lot of that is the influence of the 61 in the background, which answers to the 13 under this current cross. And so like these are also things. It's so funny because so much of this is like themes that I explored in the chapter on evolution. So like it's a big chapter, it's a dense chapter. So like when the book comes out, just be ready for it. But it's gonna be a lot of that's gonna be a journey in itself. It's gonna be fun. But the point being that like I think I'm more aware of how the 61 sits in the background frequency because I have like the 13 as a receptor in my own design to like to kind of pick up on it and
Mhm.
like draw that connection. And so I think there are more personalized ways that you're going to notice the internal theme.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that because like everything I'm getting from like because that was fully a transmission, is like seeing how you as the individual connect to the collective, right? And that's obviously going to be individual per person. And
Yeah.
like all of these tools, they're just tools to help you do that. But it's just fascinating the way that everybody kind of finds these little connections on their own. I love it. Oh,
Yeah. And
mm,
it's like, I mean, it's really, they're very powerful tools, and it is also like a lot of information, and it can get overwhelming. And that's why I say, like, when you're taking on a system like human design or gene keys, because of course
mhm.
they're very intimately connected, it's like trust your pace. Trust your pace and trust your process, and like,
Yeah.
take it in doses. Don't try to tackle everything at once. I also even teach that, like, and this is not necessarily true in every case, but it's actually, I think, sometimes like challenging to take on too much of like both systems simultaneously. Like if you're learning human design and you're learning gene keys concurrent, even that can at times be a little bit overwhelming, because although they're similar, they're also different. And like if you're the kind of person that is good at like assimilating like different information and like drawing the threads, then maybe that works for you. Like I'm definitely a person that can do that, even though I had a lot of training in human design before I took on the gene keys. So I didn't actually find them at the same time. I learned
Mhm.
human design first, and then I started to like assimilate the keys, and now I can easily like bounce back and forth and synthesize and all those things. But even that for some people can be really overwhelming. And so it's like I think take it in doses, take it in stages. Like some people need, more time to process. And for some people, like all of the information might not be even as important. Like I can
Mhm.
get really deep into details, and that's fascinating in itself. And it does provide a really like unique lens for interpretation, really accurate and, effective lens for interpretation. And yet it's not the whole picture, because so much is in like, okay, well, how are you actually living? How are you living
Right.
outside of your head, outside of your mind?
Yeah. It's like, can you actually take this information and embody it? Like, integrate it into your body. Like, start small. You don't have to do with the whole picture at first.
And I think like what's interesting about that even is that you'll find a lot of this stuff you're living naturally. Like
Hmm.
without like often, and it's not always the case, because it depends as well on like, how deeply conditioned you are, how split from your truth you are, like how much you're like living in the not self and that kind of a thing. But oftentimes you'll find, at least to some extent, that like you're just, to some extent, you're living your design by default. And for some people, they're really living it like really well, without having any knowledge like at all of the of this system, of this information. And I think the place where it's like really the most effective, like, and especially I guess in this case, like speaking to human design, like yes, strategy and authority is vital. It's like the most important piece, but also like where human design can serve as a signpost for the
Hmm.
places where you are off track. So more than like, I think more than trying to embody who you are, because that's just going to happen naturally. It's more looking at like, where is there an indicator that you're off track and something needs course correction? Like
Mm.
those are the pieces that you really want to like look out for, if that makes sense.
Hmm. When you get into those moments, is there anything in particular that you look for or that helps you kind of notice where you're off?
Yeah. I mean, there are quite a few, like, you mean in terms of indicators?
Hmm.
Yeah, there are quite a few um tools, like things that serve as signposts, but I think like, and this gets into a lot of detail and nuance, but I think one of the biggest ones is like when you're in transference
Mm.
on the personality side of your variable. Like transference is like one of the biggest like indicators or signposts that you're not aligned, and
Mm.
that you're off track essentially.
Right. Hmm. Such a good conversation. It's like I don't want to keep you. I feel like I could keep you for forever. I'm gonna have endless
No, no, you're
questions, but
good.
as we wrap up, is there anything in particular before your book comes out and people can dive in to that like if you had one seed you could plant for people, what would it be?
Mm, I think a big one, what's coming through really strong is as we move through this transition, which is, it is going to be a bit messy and chaotic. It's really like finding what works for you is going to be so important. Like, what, as we move through this transitional phase, like, what is your anchor? And it
Mm,
doesn't necessarily need to be human design or gene keys. Like, for some people that could work really well, and I also realize that that's not necessarily accessible for everyone, or interesting, or whatever the case may be. That's not necessarily what it's going to be. I think that can be really, really helpful. And I think the biggest thing is just like, how are you going to ground? Like, how are you going to, find your truth in all of this? How are you going to learn more and more to self source your power? And
mm,
that's like a really big piece. Like, as we move into the coming age, because all of this tribal support is dropping out of the background, you can no longer rely on the external to support you. This I think this is one of the things that's probably most scary for everyone, whether they realize it or not. Whether you
mhm,
are conscious of this or not, I think one of the scariest things is realizing that that external support is like all that scaffolding, it's crumbling. It's getting wiped out. And what's going to happen is we're really going to have to turn inward to self-source and find our power. And like, essentially it's going to rip people like out of victimhood. Like, you're going to
mm,
have no choice. You're going to have no choice but to step the fuck up and look after yourself, right?
mhm,
And like, I think that can be really scary for like a lot of people, and that is the essence of the 3420. You know, and I think that, and there's a lot around the 55 as well, which is mutating, and that sits in the other half of that cross, about like, freedom and like stepping out of victimhood. And so like, these are core themes, is like, in the coming age, you're not going to be looking to the outside for support. You can't be. You literally can't be. So like, what's happening, I think one of the biggest things under the Phoenix is like, we're all going to be returning to like our personal power.
mm,
And like, that's so important. It's actually huge. It's so important. If you think about it that way, it's really exciting. Except I think the biggest challenge is realizing that like, so much of the world still lives in victimhood, and like, so many people are like living out their not selves. Like, they're not living their true selves. They're not living their highest selves. They're like very attached to, to the shadow and to the not self. And it's not to say that there's anything like wrong with that. Sorry, one second. Nope, nope, not yet. Nope, not yet. No,
almost done.
not yet. Yeah, we're almost done here. Womp, womp, womp.
I need to like insert the music there. Womp womp.
Sorry. Okay, I
No,
have an
you're good.
8-year-old, and she's out of school for the summer, so
Right. No
she thinks
problem.
I'm done, and I'm not done. And I was like right on a roll. But the point is that whatever those tools or those resources are that are going to help you through this transition, like, that's going to be so important. And I do think, like, and I address this in the book as well. Like I said, this is like, it turned out to be the biggest chapter because I
Mhm,
think it's just so important right now. But it's like, I think that for some people, at least for some people, like, understanding your design and understanding how to differentiate, that's really going to help. It's a huge key, is to
mhm,
be able to like differentiate from the homogenized world, like from the not self world. And it's not like, again, not to say that for everyone it's not necessarily going to be like human design as the roadmap, though it is like an incredible roadmap. For some people it really will just be like getting back into their body, and they don't necessarily need need the roadmap because they already know what their body is telling them. Like my ex-husband, who I'm still, very, very close with, he's one of my best friends. I use him as an example all the time because he's a manifesting generator with the entire integration circuit activated in his design. Every single channel on that circuit, which is very uncommon, by the way. I think I've only ever seen one other chart in all my years of doing human design. Well, people have it, but it's statistically, it's very uncommon. And like he understands like little bits about human design just from like what he gets from me, but like he's lived essentially his whole life according to his strategy and authority just because he has so much power in his
Mm.
design that he hasn't needed the roadmap to simply like live it and to like wind up exactly where he's meant to be. And so there are some people that are just going to naturally be, you know, on track and already like already living their truth, or that have other tools to help them get there. But I think if you don't understand like what that is for you and you're feeling lost, like it's crunch time, you
Mm.
know.
Yeah. I feel like that's just a mic drop moment. It's crunch time.
It is.
Find your tools. Let's fucking go.
Let's fucking
All right.
go.
So, one of the resources plug in for Louisa is obviously your master classes. Where can they find that? Where can people listening in find you? How can they work with you? All that jazz.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at the Starlight Mystic. And I have a link. I'm not super active on Instagram. I find social media to be one of those things that's really dysregulating, to be honest. So I'm not really active on the platform, but I do have a link in bio, where you can very easily access my 2027 masterclass if you're interested in that. And there are links to work with me if you're interested in a one-on-one session. I do really comprehensive introductory readings where I can really like set you on the path to understanding your design and your differentiation and what to do with it. So that's all there. I also have a website where you can find all of that stuff, thestarlightmystic.com. So it's the Starlight Mystic, whether you're looking on Instagram or for my website. And then again, I'm going to plug HDHD in Santa Fe this coming September. That is not just for me. There's going to be like a wealth of speakers at this conference. It's kind of like the main human design conference in the United States that happens every year in Santa Fe, which is like a hub for human design. Because when Ra was alive, he spent a lot of time teaching in New Mexico. And so there are like really strong roots there. And so a lot of people are going to be converging in September to share about human design. And it's going to be an amazing conference. I will be speaking on 2027 as well as like a number of other speakers on a variety of topics. And it's going to be really special. I actually just got the outline of all the talks and all the events. I was just looking over it the other day, which is like a semi-finalized outline of like what's happening there. And I have a discount code if people are actually
Ooh.
interested in attending the conference. I'm trying to think. I've sent it out in my newsletter for sure. I should probably have it. I don't think I have it posted at my link in bio, but I should do that so that it's like accessible through Instagram. But I do have a discount code for conference tickets for Santa Fe. If anyone is interested in attending, it's going to be so much fun. There are people I know that like some OGs of human design that are going to be there, that are going to be talking, some of like Ra's closest friends, people from Ibiza that are going to be in town for this event. It's going to be super cool.
Awesome. Well, I will put all of that in the bio as well. And then, yeah, once your book comes out, I may have to have you come back on for that
Oh,
if you're
I would
down.
love that. Yeah, I would
Yes.
love that. That'll be a lot of
Awesome.
fun, definitely.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Louisa.
Oh, Emily, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate you.
My pleasure. And scene. There you have it. Another episode of The Glass Box wrapped. It's like a present, direct from me to you. Stay tuned for scenes from our next episode.